things keep getting more and more interesting and exciting, and if we're, for those of us who are anxious, more and more worrying. I just saw the latest headlines on the Financial Times on the web that the Saudi sectarian venom is spreading across the Middle East.
Okay.
And since last night, we've been seeing news about the possibility of the king abdicating in favor of his son, who I think is the deputy crown prince. And on the other side, the Iranians proved their position in the world by taking over taking into custody
The 10 sailors.
10 American sailors, including a woman, making sure she wore hijab while she was in custody. And then very politely returning them when the situation was sorted out. So they maintained their relationship with America while demonstrating to America that they have to be treated on the same terms as other countries. And they also, it's been confirmed on the web, although I've not seen it personally, that the Iranians apologized to the Saudis for what happened after to the Saudi embassy in Iran after the execution of the Shia cleric. Iran is going out of its way to show that it's a civilized member of international society.
Mm-hmm.
And while these things have been going on, I've been party to a number of discussions which have given me some interesting ideas. I think you've heard me say before that the faster things change, the further we need to look back in time in order to understand how the hell we got to where we are today.
Yes.
And I think that this is a good example of that need. You know that when Islam emerged out of Arabia into the what one historian has called the Sitted part of Southwest Asia, mm-hmm. the part of Southwest Asia that had become a network of trading cities, especially Damascus in the first place. It expanded, and Islam expanded west gradually as far as the Atlantic, east gradually as far as central China, and then south into India. And was the biggest empire in history so far. But there had been a succession of empires before that, going back to the second millennium, and each one had been bigger than the one before. Mm-hmm. But apart from the Roman Empire, which was to its north, the empires that started in Southwest Asia, the last two had been Iranian, Persian empires, the Achaemenians and the Sasanians.
Right, right.
And it's very interesting that Islam provided a very significant basis for the development of trade, and it spread through the trading network, which was the first time an empire had spread through the trading network. Previous empires had spread in order to take over resources, mm-hmm. north and south as much as east and west. Mm-hmm. Islam spread along the trading network, east and west. Mm-hmm. And it facilitated trade because of it was the most important feature of Islam was the Sharia, Islamic law. Islamic law has two main branches. One is family law, how the family should be composed and what the relationship should be between a family and the public. But more important than that for history is that the other branch of it was contract law for commerce. And so Islamic law became the basis of commerce throughout the main trading networks that had developed in world history up to that point, from Southwest Asia, west through North Africa, and east through Central Asia into India and into China. But what Islam lacked was a political philosophy. The only beginning of a political philosophy that Islam had was that you needed a government in order to provide social order so that people could follow the law. But it didn't tell you how to do that.
Right.
And from the very beginning, there has been argument, conflict in Islam about how government should be formed. And the Sunni Islam, which is majority Islam, probably 80-odd% of the total, follows an Arabian model, which is an assemblage of opinion leaders, and very soon after the beginnings of Islam, those opinion leaders became Islamic scholars, which in fact was following the Judaic principle of the way, Judaism is in fact, Orthodox Judaism is governed in the same way. But there was also the Roman model, and the Romans had learned a lot from the Persians, and the most important model for government was the Persian model, which was the divine right of kings, from which the Tudors got it as well. Mm-hmm. So what in fact happened in Southwest Asia was that what was left over from the Persian Empire, which had been the most important empire before Islam emerged, continued to operate according to its own model. And it worked out a way to develop, to base the Persian model on the Prophet's family. And the governments in the eastern part of the Islamic world, ever since the Caliphate ceased to be able to govern the whole of the Islamic civilization at the beginning of the 9th century, have been reproductions of the Sasanian court, mm-hmm. with Persian as the language, the Persian as the language of administration, and Persian as the language of belles lettres, because everybody had to write poems of eulogy for the rulers. And gradually, larger and larger parts of it became Shia, because that was the model of how to interpret the government, the religious hierarchy according to the Persian model. And now, in the 21st century, Islam is divided between the partisans of Iran on the one hand and the partisans of Saudi Arabia on the other hand. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely amazing.
What's the most amazing thing about it, in your view?
That the divide between the Persian way of doing things and the Arab way of doing things, which was there at the death of the Prophet,
right,
is still there in the Islamic world.
Oh, it's still there, all right.
And it's dividing the Islamic world. Mm-hmm. And it shows you that we have got used to thinking of Islam as something different from everything else. And our periodization of history cuts off Islamic civilization as a separate chunk of history.
Mm-hmm. It does.
But that in fact is misleading, because it's the continuities from the past through Islam up to the present which are much more instructive about how the world is working today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, because if you look at the analysis you just gave, which I'm going to listen to again and take notes on, that's pretty good stuff. The Persian method, if you will, has seemingly now finally reemerged in an actual sense after being essentially off the radar chart for a couple of centuries, and has now, if you believe what you're reading, in fact is replicative of the kind of Persian Sharia state that the Persian Shia state that they've tried to emulate since the time of the 9th or 10th century.
Well, in fact, what's going on now is due to globalization, because with globalization, people are looking for larger and larger identities. And this is the first time in Islamic history that all of Sunnis have felt themselves as part of a single community, and the need to show that that's the whole of Islam. And at the same time, the same thing is happening to the Shia. Whereas up until very recently, they were not in any way unitary. They
Not at
were
all.
separate little communities.
Correct. But yet, if you look at a map, I mean, the Columbia 2000 project, they've done some very good work on Islam. And in fact, there was a map in the New York Times last week, and I went to the Columbia website and downloaded that map and a couple of other maps. Once again, it's very, very dramatic. The very small number of Shia and where they're localized. I mean, it's just incredible. They're surrounded by a sea of Sunnis. And
But the end of the Sasanian Empire, which was centered in what is now Iran, it stretched around the Arabian Peninsula into Yemen, and it stretched through Lebanon into Egypt.
and this was a Shia empire.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't Shia, it was Sasanian.
Persian.
But
Right.
it's that model of government that remained attractive in those areas where it had dominated.
So in a funny way, the government, which came almost as an afterthought to try to maintain the structure to allow for the open and free practice of the religion, becomes the more enduring institution, if you will, even in the memories of cultures, as you've stated, they're trying to reattain it now.
Well, in Islam, the most important thing about Islam is that it tells you how to manage society
Mm-hmm.
in a way that Christianity doesn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Shiism is one way of organizing society, and Sunnism is another way of organizing society. And it's those two features of the religion that have been the most historically important.
So this strife, the ongoing strife between the two branches, is not as if it was bad enough. It's not merely a religious strife. It's a societal strife as well.
And one could say, and maybe it's a good way to finish our session for today, that the Saudi monarchy is obviously at the present time uneasy, anxious. And the Saudi monarchy really is out of place because it's a monarchy in a Sunni country,
Mm-hmm.
claiming to be the guardians of the shrine,
Mm-hmm.
which would be a very appropriate thing for a Shia monarchy to do,
Mm-hmm.
but not for a Sunni monarchy.
Very interesting. You're right, though. Huh. So where does this leave I mean, how aware of this discussion would be the Deputy Crown Prince, do you think? If you extracted any slants that he might have?
I suspect he doesn't have the same sort of historical information that as we've been
Mm-hmm.
picking up. But I think that I think that the change is going to continue. We're at the beginnings still of what's going to happen in the Middle East, because there's all the things that are not working in the Middle East at the moment are not working because the old way of doing things that was established in the 20th century, whether it's the Saudi monarchy or the division of the Southwest Asia up into nation states,
Mm-hmm.
has ceased to work.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't yet know what's going to replace it. And it's being made even more problematic by the outflow of people from Syria into Europe, which is forcing Europe to pay attention to what's going on in the Middle East, and going to make it much more difficult for the Middle East to sort out its own problems, even if it would have been allowed to do it even if America had allowed it in the first place.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, Professor, that's very interesting. I'm looking forward to continuing this next week.
Yes.
Have a good week. Thank you.
And you.
All right.